Hello everybody and welcome to the MLittleProgramming tutorial. In today's video we're going to be looking at functions in Python, what functions in Python are, how to use functions in Python, and when to use functions in Python. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of this type of content. Let's jump straight into it. So what is a function? A function is a block of code which runs when we call it from somewhere else in our code. You can pass in data, known as parameters or arguments, into a function. A function in Python may or may not return data as a result, and we'll get into what happens in a function when we don't specify a return value later on in the video. Let's get into how we define a function in Python, so let's jump into pycharm. To indicate to Python that we're about to define a function, we use the keyword def. After a space we define the name of our variable. We're going to keep it super simple right out the blocks and just call our function as my_function. We then add parentheses to the end of the function name to tell Python that we can call this function. When we get more advanced with these functions in a moment, you'll see that this is where we can pass parameters into a function between these parentheses. Finally, to tell Python that we have finished declaring our function, we place a colon. With this basic example, I want to give you a bit more information about some of the Python specific details that functions have. So first up, in other languages like Java and Scala, we have to define what the return type of a function is within the function declaration. So if we knew this function we're defining is going to return an integer, we need to tell those languages that in the declaration statement. In Python, this is not needed. You may have noticed the way we name this function my_function. Python has a few naming conventions for functions, like with variables. The naming convention for a Python function is that all letters should be lowercase, and each individual word in a function should be separated by an underscore. These naming conventions are designed to both improve readability of Python code, but also so that every Python programmer is styling their code in a similar way so that it can be picked up easily by other developers in the Python community. Now we've gone over a few interesting facts about declaring a function in Python, let's get into the body of a function. So after our colon, it's similar to what we looked at with Python loops. After the colon we press enter, and then we follow the Python indentation rule of 4 spaces. This is where we define the body of our Python function. For this first example, we're just going to do the most basic task, and that is to print a string. So we're going to print MLittleProgramming. So now we have a function that we can call, and that will do something when we call it, print MLittleProgramming. So how do we call a function in Python? We can call a function from anywhere else in this file, after the function definition. I'll show you what I mean by that in a moment. To call in a function in Python, we essentially type this part of our function, so the name of the function, followed by parentheses. So if we run this file, we see MLittleProgramming printed. What I mean by we can call functions anywhere after the function is defined is that currently we are calling the function after it's been defined. However, if we move this function call above where the function is defined and run the program, we get this error. The error is that Python doesn't think that this function has been defined. This is because our function hasn't been defined yet in the program's runtime, as the function definition is below where we are calling it. So now we've got the basics of functions, let's make our function a bit more complex. Let's add an argument to our function. Before we do that, you may hear other people in the software development community throwing words about like parameters and arguments. Both of these words seem to refer to the same meaning. Maybe surprisingly, they actually don't. Let's clear the difference up. The difference between these two terms is best explained from the function's perspective. A parameter is the variable listed inside the parentheses in the function definition, whereas an argument is the value that is sent to the function when it is called. So we're calling this function here currently with no arguments. This is because we're sending no value to the function in the parentheses. This also means our function has no parameters because we haven't defined a variable in this function definition. Now let's make our function a bit more complex and add a parameter to our function definition. A parameter definition follows the same rule as when we define a variable. Now this can obviously cause some issues if you're not aware of them. Let's see them in action first by defining a parameter called param. Inside our function, instead of printing MLittleProgramming, we're going to print our param, or whatever we pass into the function. So now if we come down to where our function is called, we can pass in data, which is our argument. We're initially going to pass in the string MLittleProgramming, so this program will have the same functionality as before. So when we run this now, we'll see that MLittleProgramming is printed again. However, as I just mentioned, some problems can arise with passing arguments into a function in Python. Python is a dynamically typed language, which means variable types, therefore parameter types, are calculated at runtime. What this means in terms of Python functions is that we can actually call our function here with any type we want at different points in our program. So to show this, if we call our function again underneath where we were calling it initially, but this time with an integer, so we'll pass in 36 as our argument. When we run this, what you'll see is that there are two lines printed, MLittleProgramming and the number 36. This is because our function does not care what type we are passing into it, which is something to keep in mind when you're designing your functions. Now let's talk a bit more about arguments. One situation where we can get an error with arguments is if we pass a different amount of arguments into a function than we have parameters. So in this example, if we pass two arguments into our function, for example, passing both our string MLittleProgramming and an integer 36 in the same call, we'll get an error. This error is saying that the function we was expecting to receive one argument, but we gave it two. Although what if we don't know how many arguments we're going to pass into a function? Python has a solution for this. These are called arbitrary arguments. So if you don't know how many arguments your function is going to be sent, then you can add an asterisk before a parameter. So if we add an asterisk before our parameter, param, and run our program again, we see that our two arguments have been put into a tuple by Python. We can access each one of these items in the tuple we are given in the same way as we access items in a list. So if we want the first item, the string MLittleProgramming, in our print statement we add square brackets to the end of the parameters and pass in the first item index, which is 0. So if we run that again, all that's printed is the first item, MLittleProgramming. You may also have the problem where you don't know what order your arguments are going to be sent in. To solve this, we can use what are called keyword arguments. Keyword arguments use the key equals value syntax. To demonstrate this, we'll pass our arguments in with keywords. So the keyword for MLittleProgramming is going to be name, so our argument is name equals MLittleProgramming. And the argument now for the number 36 is going to be number equals 36. So back up in our function, we need to access these values. To access these values, we actually need to increase the amount of parameters we are telling this function it should expect. To do that, like with arguments, we just separate each individual parameter with a comma. We also need to change the name of the parameters. The name of the parameters have to be the same as the keywords we are calling them. So we're going to have the parameters number and name. The key feature of keyword parameters is that it doesn't matter what order we pass arguments in to the function. So in this case, we're passing the arguments in the order name followed by number, but the function is going to receive them in the order number followed by name. Now if we print name and run the program, we see that Python prints the name MLittleProgramming. So now we've seen arbitrary arguments and keyword arguments. There is actually a way to combine these two argument types. These are not surprisingly called arbitrary keyword arguments. With arbitrary keyword arguments, we don't have to know how many arguments are going to be sent or what order the arguments are going to be sent to a function. So we can actually go back to using just one parameter. To tell Python we are going to use arbitrary keyword arguments, we place two asterisks before our parameter. The way we call an arbitrary keyword argument, as opposed to just a keyword argument, is that here instead of referencing the key of the data we're trying to access, we pass the key as an index into square brackets. So in this case, to have the same functionality as before, we reference our parameter and simply pass the key name as the index. So we'll pass in the string name to print MLittleProgramming. So if we run that now, we'll see that the functionality has been preserved and we have printed MLittleProgramming. We have now covered arguments and parameters in Python functions. Let's now move on to returning from a Python function. Functions in Python do not have to return a value. When a return value is not specified, the function would automatically return none. Python functions, as we have seen so far in this video, do not even need a return statement. However, if we do want to return a value from a Python function, we generally want to go to the end of our function and write the keyword return followed by the value we want to return. So for an example, we're going to return double our number parameter. So to do this, next to the word return, we're going to access our number with the arbitrary keyword argument syntax and times that by 2. To output what is returned from the function, we can just print our call to the function. As you can see, for our example, when we run this, we print the value 72. And that just about wraps up today's video. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you got a lot of value from it. If you would like more Python programming tutorials, there is a link in the top right now, and a link in the description down below to a playlist of Python programming tutorials. With that said, if you enjoyed the video, please drop a like as it really helps the channel, and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, if you've got any questions, drop a comment down below and I'll get back to you.